Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. I feel like you, like many people, have probably told you, as you sort of talk about in the series, that you are the part of a lot of people's lives, and you are very integral into sort of my self actualization, blah blah blah. Um, I was so excited to see the show, and I got through it incredibly quickly. Um, I guess the first question that I had for you, sort of a softball question, is what's your favorite thing about New Orleans, and what were you excited about going back to that city?
I just got through saying this. I love that city so
No.
much. I try to go back every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Halloween is my favorite holiday, and New
Mm-hmm.
Orleans knows how to do costumes.
Mm-hmm.
So Halloween in New Orleans is the best. But what I love about that city in general is it is by far the most unique city in America. There is nothing that comes remotely close to it. It's the history, it's the built environment, it's the vibe and the energy, like it's everything. But it is a world away from any other city. There is nothing that you could remotely compare to it.
I've never been there, and I've always wanted to go. And like
This
my,
blows my mind. So many people tell me this. It is just an
yeah,
incredible place. It's very different now too. Post Katrina, it is a
yeah.
very different city now.
One of my husband's close friends in med school, who I became friends with when we were living in Florida, when they were in for their not med school, for their his residency. She's from New Orleans, and she was always like, she says sort of the exact same thing that you said. She was like, it's a completely different city. I don't think she's lived there in a minute. So she was always the cheerleader for New Orleans. And every time someone said that, she's like, "How the hell have you not been to New Orleans?" because it's such a vibrant city.
Yep.
Um,
You better hurry up and visit it because it's on borrowed time.
mm, oh God. Um, I wanted to know. Okay, so the Real World was sort of a pioneer for a lot of reality television. With the distance that you have from the original show, I guess like I wanted to know what your perspective of reality TV was and sort of how that, I won't say messed with your head going back into that situation, but I feel like after a couple of decades with knowledge and you get to watch reality television. I'm not sure how much or any you watch of reality television. It's part of our culture now. Sort of how did that kind of play with your head going into a sort of replica of a situation that you were in before where it was entirely different?
Very much a replica. Yeah, Real World was the pioneer of reality TV, which
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people today don't realize. But it was very different from what we now think of as reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
The original Real World, up until about my season, was documentary style, something that I think young people today totally don't get. Like, what? It's like a long version of TikTok.
Oh God,
uh,
that made me feel so old.
starting, I think the year of my season when Survivor began as the next reality TV and what reality TV became known as, that changed the paradigm completely. It's why even the real world itself completely changed after my season. Became less about just everyday life conversations, unpacking social issues, and TV became the thing we know it today, which is about huge personalities being seen, making noise, being salacious, being competitive. And I think the other big part of the paradigm that changed was, you know, 10, 11 years into reality TV, it became a platform for what many people saw as a way to build a career. Um,
Yeah.
reality being on reality TV was sort of became the first step of a media career for a lot of people. I think our show was in the twilight days of where there really was like you did the real world and that was sort of it. There was no expectation that it became something else.
Yeah.
Um, it rarely happened for anyone. There wasn't social media around. There really wasn't much of the internet around. There wasn't
Mm-hmm.
any way to monetize and move on. And it was certainly not my expectation. I was naive that I thought I was just going to go back to my little quiet life and live my life and carry on. Obviously, that was Definitely not what happened.
Really, Danny? No.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I nowadays like I don't watch a lot of TV period,
Mm,
especially reality TV. I don't have a very high opinion of most reality TV today. Um, I think it has become a demon in many ways. And in being related now, what's interesting today, I work in tech, so I work around a lot of young people and what they think of. This is how I understand what young people today think of as reality TV. And I've learned that when I share with anyone that I was on reality TV, that sparks a very particular perception in people's minds about what I've done and what I've taken part in.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. There's a because I was even thinking about when I was watching the show, I feel like I remember, I might be misremembering, but I think there was before your season dropped, there was even like a casting special where they were talking about, they showed the cast of The Real World and the cast of that season of Road Rules. And I think there was like, they were showing who was going to go to what show. And then the whole time I was watching Homecoming, I was just like, oh, like just even thinking about like the casting process 20 years later is like insanely different.
Extremely
Um,
different, right? Back then,
mhm.
you either went in person to a tryout or you made a VHS tape that you mailed in.
Oh God, HS tape, you're
There
killing
were
me.
there were lots of tapes being mailed back and forth back then,
Yeah, yeah, okay,
which is hilarious.
yeah.
And
You
by the
imagine
way,
like,
they originally tried to cast me for Road Rules. And I
I
just found
vaguely
out
remember
Melissa
that.
too. They tried to put me and Melissa on Road Rules, and we both said hell no.
I would somehow raise money to pay you both an exorbitant amount of money just to watch you do like an episode. But I would also just pay good money to like watch you and her and Kelly sit around and just talk once a year at brunch. So um
I'm
okay.
gonna put you to that task because I would enjoy that.
All right. I think I have a couple of I know a lot of publicists. I'm sure I can get into some studio head somewhere. Um one of my favorite episodes of Homecoming is when Melissa has Ellie come to the house, and I love how excited you are for her to do the tarot card reading and the advice that she gave to you. She kept repeating it. She said, "Step into it, step into it, step into it." And I wanted to know how much that advice from Ellie has been on your mind since filming has finished and the show has dropped.
Yeah, it was very interesting. That was a lot of fun. And I think for the past 22 years, I did the opposite. I very much
Mm,
tried to hide from this experience. It was pretty damn traumatizing, as I
yeah.
shared, and I really worked hard, both consciously and subconsciously, to tuck it away and move past it.
Hmm.
To the point where it had just gotten to a sense of feeling like the whole thing was the original was just a fever dream. Did that really happen? I think
Yeah.
it did because I still feel the effects, but this time around, first off, through my own personal journey and growth,
Hmm.
combined with just this really beautiful, affirming gift that this experience has been, has
Hmm.
really, really changed my mindset.
Hmm.
Going from one of avoiding it, um, hiding it,
Yeah.
dismissing it, to one of really realizing, recognizing the true impact of what that experience was. Hearing from
Hmm.
people in the Love Fest has just been amazing, and realizing that for all the pain that came out of it, a ton of good came from it too. And not just in this country. I think the amazing part that people forget is people globally watched it, and it was just as meaningful, if not more meaningful, to people outside the US, where societies maybe aren't as progressive.
I do remember, I think New Orleans, because I think New Orleans was one of the first seasons that I watched. And then I went back and I watched like Boston and New York. And I feel like, and maybe you can sort of attest to this, like New Orleans felt like on a completely different level almost. I don't know if it was just a perfect storm of a lot of things. I mean, you were everywhere. I feel like your sort of visibility on the show sort of hit at the same time that a lot of um, queer characters are coming out, like on television, like 2000, like Will and Grace was on TV, Queer as Folk, the US show was on TV. It was sort of like everything was hitting at the right time. So I feel like the strength of that visibility is probably very helpful to the success of the show, I guess. Um,
Yeah, I think with our cast, it was a lot of elements coming together at once. I think it was probably hitting peak viewership of
mm,
MTV and the real world.
yeah.
Your generation, the millennial generation, which is a huge powerhouse, really was tuning in mass at that point. And I think society was at a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
The work that I did and representation was part of, like, it's a funnel. If you think
Mm-hmm.
about all the work that decades of generations had done to build the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
And then, again, mine was season 9, so you had a handful of people who had been out on the show, and
Yeah.
Norm is pivotal in my own personal story. The original New York, which is it's the best one because it is
Mm-hmm. Like the
genuine
first,
and raw.
yeah, the
But
OG,
seeing
yeah.
seeing Norm was
Mm-hmm.
was inspiring, and that meant a lot to me in my own youth. I haven't watched most of those seasons in between, to be honest, but
Mm-hmm.
Norm really stands out to me. So they had done work, the funnel was building and building, and then I came and it hit at that pivotal point where society, I think, was at a tipping point and ready to embrace change.
I wanted to ask, oh my God, I feel like all my questions are so serious, but I wanted to ask about, I was very interested in the conversation that you have with Matt on the show. Just because I'm a queer person who I didn't grow up with religion. Religion sort of like I have a natural aversion to it. Um, and I thought it was interesting that the episode where they showed the conversation with you and Matt, I think if it's not in the same episode, it's like the episode after where Julie's husband is there and she talks about losing her faith and she talks about it with everybody. And I was curious going into it, um, did you, I don't say prepare yourself for that conversation with him, or did you sort of just, I don't say on the fly, just talk about your feelings with him? Because I think that's one of my, um, I won't say favorite moments of the show, but it was just sort of like I feel like it's very important for queer people to sort of stand their ground for a lot of people who don't necessarily have the same perspective and sometimes can say um, somewhat hurtful things to people.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up in the Deep South,
Mm-hmm.
and religion, Southern Baptist fundamentalism was very much a part of my story, still is to
Mm-hmm.
this day. Matt and I actually grew up in the same area,
Yeah, I
which,
remember
which
that.
is super unique. So very much understand each other and where we come from. What we do have in common is we're both very accustomed to being outsiders.
Yeah,
We both grew up as outsiders in our communities, though from very different perspectives. But
yeah.
that conversation was one of my top two goals going into this. The
Mm.
first
Okay.
the first original run of the real world, his views were allowed to sort of slide by, and he said some pretty harmful, dismissive things that at the
Mm-hmm.
time I just didn't have the language to speak to effectively
Right.
as a 21-year old. But I'm very much equipped with that language now. And I think these conversations are more important today than ever, seeing where the
Mm-hmm.
country is heading and sliding and how divided the country is. We've got to have the language to speak to each other in meaningful ways that build bridges. I came very prepared for that. It was one of my top two goals.
Yeah.
Ironically, I think Matt naively came, at least hoping not to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Um, he seemed to not be prepared to take on that conversation, and to a degree that even surprised me in seeing the
Mm-hmm.
final edit,
Yeah.
which to me was very naive. I just feel like you had to know that conversation was coming.
Yeah.
Um, but I did think it was important to have that conversation. I do think people like Matt have true, genuine, solid, pure intentions,
Hmm.
comes from a good place, but I can separate and compartmentalize people and individuals
Hmm.
from their frameworks.
Yeah.
And that's where Matt struggles. People like Matt struggle as they make it personal. They can't separate the two.
Hmm.
Um, there's a sense that if you disagree with or attack their framework, no matter how dismissive it is of you, then they view it as you attacking them directly.
Yeah.
That was my main goal, was to try to get him and viewers to understand, like, this is not a personal issue. I can
Yeah.
love you as a person and still push back against your framework and challenge it.
Hmm.
The conversations we had were hours long. Of course, they had to be
Yeah.
condensed down
I,
into
I
a
can
few
tell.
minutes.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think the most important part of that conversation was Matt has 7 children.
Hmm.
There was a whole conversation about what if one of your kids end up being gay.
That's exactly what I thought too. I was just like,
Unfortunately, that ended up being cut out. But
hmm.
I think that I think that's the final inflection point that really had him
Hmm.
thinking was, yeah, that's a high possibility, and
Yeah.
if that happens,
Oh,
I have to accept that.
yeah. Of course. All right.
Now, the
Uh,
reason that whole conversation is important, though, is because, as many of us know, many of us, and the reason this conversation was so important is because it's not just part of my personal story, but this topic is incredibly important in many people's lives,
yeah.
especially in our culture.
Yeah. I
I think a
agree.
lot of people struggle with this in their day to day.
Hmm.
And many people have their own sort of don't ask, don't tell with family and loved
Yeah.
ones when there's this division over faith
Hmm.
versus what people genuinely are at their core.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us confuse our cultural beliefs with faith too,
Hmm.
what it boils down to.
All right. Well, I think that's actually all the time I have with you, Danny. You've been your presence on television was very important to me. I won't say anything more than that. So I'm legitimately honored to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. I guess stay safe. Have a good rest of your day, and I enjoy seeing you on Instagram with your beautiful daughter. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joey. Good to
Yeah,
see you again.
you too. Bye.
I'm flattered. Bye bye.